A disabled child, a struggling waitress, and a hidden billionaire all met in one restaurant. But what happened next changed every single life in that room forever. Rain hammered against the hospital windows while distant thunder rolled across Los Angeles like the sound of a storm that refused to end. Inside room 407 of St. Mary's Medical Center, the world felt painfully quiet. Machines beeped steadily beside the hospital bed. A weak yellow lamp cast long shadows across pale walls. The smell of antiseptic lingered heavily in the air. And sitting beneath those dim hospital lights was 23-year-old Kim Reeves. Her once vibrant dark hair was gone now, hidden beneath a colorful silk scarf decorated with tiny blue butterflies. Chemotherapy had stolen strength from her body and color from her skin, but it had not stolen the warmth in her eyes. Across from her sat Keanu Reeves. He leaned forward in the chair beside her bed, elbows resting on his knees, exhaustion visible in every line of his face. He had not slept properly in nearly 3 days. Coffee cups littered the corner table beside him. His jacket hung carelessly over the back of the chair. Every few seconds his eyes drifted toward the heart monitor as if sheer willpower alone could force the numbers to remain stable. Doctors had already explained the truth. The cancer had spread everywhere. Bones. Liver. Lungs. There were no more treatments left to try. But Keanu refused to leave her side. Kim studied him quietly. Then she smiled faintly. "You look terrible," she whispered. Keanu laughed softly despite himself. "Thanks. That's exactly what a dying sister should say to comfort her brother." Kim's weak smile widened slightly. "I'm serious. You need sleep." "I'll sleep later." "Keanu." "No." Silence settled between them again. Outside the rain intensified against the glass. Kim slowly turned her head toward the dark window. "You remember Rose?" she asked suddenly. Keanu's expression softened immediately. Rose Patterson. The waitress from the little diner outside Los Angeles. Every Tuesday for nearly 8 months, after chemotherapy appointments, Keanu had taken Kim there. The diner itself was nothing special. Old cracked booths. Cheap coffee. A flickering neon sign that barely worked. But Rose made Kim laugh. And during those terrible final months, laughter mattered more than medicine. Kim smiled weakly at the memory. "She never looked at me like I was dying." Keanu swallowed hard. "Because you weren't dying to her." Kim shook her head gently. "No. Everyone else looked at me with pity." Her breathing grew shallow. "Nurses. Doctors. Friends." She paused. "Even strangers." A tear rolled slowly down her cheek. "But Rose treated me like I was still a person." Keanu remembered it perfectly. Rose asking Kim about books instead of blood tests. Asking about music instead of medication. Talking about dreams instead of disease. She made the diner feel normal. Safe. Human. Kim slowly reached for her brother's hand. "Promise me something. Anything." Her fingers tightened weakly around his. "Create more places like that diner." Keanu frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Places where people feel seen." Her voice trembled. "Places where sick people aren't invisible." Another pause. "Places where struggling people still feel human." Keanu felt his throat tighten painfully. "Kim. Promise me." The storm outside rumbled louder. Inside the hospital room, time seemed to stop. Finally Keanu nodded. "I promise." Kim smiled. A peaceful smile. Almost relieved. For several minutes neither of them spoke. Keanu simply held her hand while the monitors beeped quietly beside them. Then Kim whispered one final sentence. You always keep your promises. Moments later her breathing slowed. The heart monitor changed rhythm. Nurses rushed into the room. Doctors shouted instructions. Someone pulled Keanu backward. But all he could hear was the terrible sound of flatlining machines. The world shattered in an instant. He remembered screaming her name. Remembered begging doctors to do something. Remembered collapsing against the hallway wall afterward, unable to breathe. But mostly he remembered the silence. The unbearable silence that comes when someone you love disappears forever. 2 weeks later, Keanu stood outside Rose's diner in the pouring rain. He could not bring himself to enter. The neon sign still flickered exactly the same. Customers still laughed inside. Coffee still steamed against fogged windows. Everything looked normal. But Kim was gone. And without her the entire world felt empty. Eventually Rose stepped outside carrying an umbrella. She found Keanu standing motionless in the rain with tears streaming down his face. She said nothing. She simply wrapped her arms around him while he broke apart. She loved this place, Keanu whispered shakily. Rose nodded gently. She loved you too. Keanu stared through the diner window. I made her a promise. Rose looked at him carefully. Then keep it. That single sentence changed his life forever. Because grief alone can destroy a person. But grief combined with purpose can transform them. And from that promise, Kim's Kitchen was born. Not as a business. Not as a corporation. But as a mission. A promise from a grieving brother to the sister he could never stop loving. A promise to create places where kindness mattered. Places where struggling people felt seen. Places where nobody became invisible. Even if the world had already given up on them. Years passed. Hollywood turned Keanu Reeves into one of the most recognizable men on earth. Movies made billions. Fans screamed his name across red carpets. Luxury brands offered contracts worth fortunes. But no matter how famous he became, one memory stayed frozen inside him forever. A small hospital room. Rain against dark windows. A dying sister asking him to make the world a little kinder. And every single decision he made afterward traced back to that moment. Because some promises do not fade with time. Some promises become the reason you keep breathing. The reason you keep fighting. The reason you refuse to let the world grow colder. And Keanu Reeves intended to keep that promise until his very last breath. 20 years later, the promise still lived inside Keanu Reeves like a fire that never stopped burning. Most people saw headlines. Movie premieres. Luxury suits. Magazine covers. Millions of dollars. But very few people understood the quiet reason behind Kim's Kitchen. It was never about fame. Never about profit. Never about building a restaurant empire. It was about keeping one dying girl's wish alive. The very first Kim's Kitchen opened in a forgotten neighborhood outside Los Angeles. The building itself looked hopeless. The roof leaked during storms. Then 20. Then 30. Now there were 47 restaurants across the country. And every single one carried Kim Reeves' name above the door. But success created distance. Corporate structures formed. Regional managers took control. Reports replaced conversations. And somewhere along the way, Keanu began noticing something troubling. Numbers that looked too perfect. Employee turnover rates that made no sense. Anonymous complaints buried beneath polished corporate summaries. Especially from one location. Austin. Kim's Kitchen number 23. At first the complaints seemed isolated. One email mentioned missing tips. Another mentioned unfair scheduling. Then came accusations of intimidation. Harassment. Threats. Every report eventually landed on the desk of regional manager Gary Patterson, Rose's nephew. And every time his explanation sounded smooth and convenient. Disgruntled employees. Workplace misunderstandings. People exaggerating because they can't handle pressure. But something about it bothered Keanu deeply. Because he knew abuse rarely announced itself loudly. Real abuse hid beneath polished reports. Behind smiling managers. Inside systems designed to silence vulnerable people. And his instincts told him something ugly was happening in Austin. One evening Keanu sat alone in his Los Angeles office reviewing financial reports while rain tapped softly against giant glass windows overlooking the city. The Austin numbers looked excellent. Too excellent. Profits higher than average. Labor costs unusually low. Operational efficiency almost suspiciously perfect. Then he noticed something else. Employee turnover was nearly 4 times higher than every other location. He frowned. That statistic mattered. Happy employees stayed. Miserable ones disappeared. Keanu opened another file. Customer reviews. Most were positive. But hidden between glowing ratings were strange patterns. The food was great but staff looked terrified. Our waitress seemed exhausted. Management atmosphere felt hostile. One review stopped him cold. A young server helped my disabled son with incredible kindness while her manager openly mocked her for wasting time. Keanu stared at that sentence for a long moment. Something tightened painfully in his chest. Because kindness mattered to him more than profits ever would. And cruelty toward vulnerable people was the one thing he could never tolerate. He immediately called Gary Patterson. The regional manager answered cheerfully. Keanu. Everything's running beautifully down here. Tell me about Austin. A slight pause. What about it? Turnover rate. Gary chuckled lightly. Tough location. Busy market. Some employees can't keep up. And the complaints? Another pause. Honestly? Mostly drama. You know how service workers can be. Keanu's expression hardened slightly. No. I know how abused employees sound when nobody listens to them. Silence filled the line briefly. Finally Gary sighed. Look, Vince Hartley runs a tight operation. Maybe he's stricter than average, but strict managers get results. Results. Keanu hated that word sometimes. Because cruel people often used results to justify destroying others. After the call ended, he remained motionless for several minutes. Then he stood slowly and walked toward the framed photograph hanging beside his office window. Kim Reeves. 23 years old forever. Smiling despite the scarf covering her chemotherapy scars. You'd know what to do, he whispered quietly. And somehow he already knew the answer. If he wanted the truth, he could not arrive as a billionaire owner surrounded by executives. People hid truth from powerful men. Managers rehearsed performances. Employees stayed silent out of fear. No. If he wanted honesty, he needed invisibility. The next morning Keanu cancelled 3 meetings, postponed a. Just him. He packed worn jeans, old work boots, faded flannel shirts, and a dark trucker cap. A disguise simple enough that nobody would look twice at him. Before leaving, he stopped once more beside Kim's photograph. I promised you places where people could feel human, he said softly. His reflection stared back at him through the glass. And if someone's forgotten that promise? His jaw tightened. I'll remind them. Then he turned off the office lights and walked away. Toward Austin. Toward the truth. And toward a young waitress whose life was about to change forever. The flight to Austin landed just before sunset. Orange light stretched across the runway while distant thunderclouds gathered beyond the horizon. Inside the airport terminal, travelers rushed past carrying luggage, talking loudly into phones, laughing about vacations and business meetings. But Keanu Reeves barely noticed any of it. His attention remained fixed on the little girl sitting silently beside him. 8-year-old Lily Thompson stared through the airport window with empty eyes. She had not spoken a single word during the entire flight. Not once. A small butterfly necklace rested against her chest. Her thin fingers held it tightly, almost protectively, as though letting go might somehow cause the last pieces of her world to disappear forever. Keanu knelt beside her wheelchair carefully. "We're almost there, sweetheart." No response. Not even a glance. Just silence. The kind of silence that frightened adults because it was too deep to understand. 14 months earlier, Lily had been completely different. Loud. Curious. Fearless. She used to race through movie sets asking impossible questions about cameras and explosions and why fake blood never looked real. She loved astronomy. Dinosaurs. Ice cream for breakfast. And making adults laugh by saying outrageously serious things in a tiny voice. Keanu still remembered the first time he met her. Her father, Michael Thompson, had introduced them during filming for an action movie in Vancouver. Michael was one of Hollywood's most respected stunt coordinators. Strong. Reliable. The kind of man everyone trusted instantly. But Lily had marched directly up to Keanu with complete confidence and asked, "Are you really famous or are people pretending?" Michael nearly died from embarrassment. Keanu laughed so hard he cried. After that day Lily followed him everywhere on set. She called him Uncle Key, because she could not pronounce Keanu properly when she was younger. And somehow the nickname stayed. Michael and his wife Sarah became family over the years. Not Hollywood family. Real family. Sunday dinners. Birthday parties. Camping trips. Late-night phone calls when life became difficult. Then came the accident. Keanu still could not think about it without feeling physically sick. A drunk driver. One red light ignored. 60 miles per hour. Metal crushing against metal. Michael died instantly. Sarah survived long enough to beg paramedics to save her daughter. Those were her last words. Save Lily. The funeral destroyed everyone. But Lily's silence afterward was even worse. Doctors explained the physical injuries first. Spinal trauma. Nerve damage. Partial paralysis on her right side. Months of rehabilitation ahead. Maybe years. But the emotional damage terrified them more. Because Lily stopped speaking almost completely. Therapists tried everything. Play therapy. Trauma counseling. Medication. Art sessions. Nothing worked. She simply retreated deeper inside herself every week. Sometimes she stared at walls for hours without moving. Sometimes she woke screaming from nightmares but refused to explain them. Sometimes she clutched her mother's butterfly necklace so tightly her hands trembled. And slowly the bright fearless child disappeared. In Michael's will, Keanu had been named Lily's legal guardian. At the time it had seemed like one of those distant adult conversations people make without believing tragedy will actually happen. But tragedy had happened. And suddenly Keanu found himself raising a grieving little girl while carrying grief of his own. He sold his large Los Angeles mansion. Bought a smaller accessible home. Installed ramps. Modified bathrooms. Learned how to braid hair because Lily hated when nurses touched it. He tried everything. Cooking her favorite meals. Reading bedtime stories. Taking her to aquariums and science museums. Some days she barely reacted. Some days she refused to leave her room entirely. And every night after she fell asleep, Keanu sat alone wondering if he was failing her. The rental truck rolled through Austin traffic while city lights flickered across wet streets. Lily remained silent in the passenger seat. Keanu glanced toward her carefully. "You hungry?" No answer. "You know Texas has really good pancakes." Nothing. He smiled weakly anyway. "Maybe not as good as your mom's pancakes though." For the first time Lily blinked. A tiny reaction. But enough to make his chest ache. Sarah Thompson had made ridiculous pancakes every Sunday morning. Chocolate chip dinosaurs. Rocket ships. Smiley faces. Once she spent nearly an hour creating a pancake shaped like Saturn. Lily had laughed so hard milk came out of her nose. Now those memories lived like ghosts inside their house. The truck finally pulled into the parking lot of Kim's Kitchen number 23. At first glance the restaurant looked perfect. Bright sign. Clean windows. Busy dining room. Exactly the kind of place corporate reports praised. But Keanu had learned long ago that appearances lied. He parked slowly. Then walked around to help Lily from the truck. The moment his hands touched the wheelchair, she flinched slightly. Not from fear. From instinct. Trauma had made physical contact complicated. Keanu noticed it every single time. And every single time it broke his heart. "You okay?" A tiny nod. That was something at least. Tonight he wore faded jeans, worn boots, an old flannel shirt, and a trucker cap pulled low over his face. 3 days of stubble shadowed his jaw. Nobody would recognize him. That was the plan. As they approached the entrance, Lily suddenly whispered something so quietly he almost missed it. Too loud. Keanu crouched beside her immediately. "You want to leave?" A long pause. Then a tiny shake of her head. "No." It was the first full word she had spoken in 2 days. Inside the restaurant, laughter and conversation filled the air. Dishes clattered. Coffee machines hissed. Country music played softly overhead. Near the hostess stand stood a blonde young woman scrolling through her phone. Her name tag read Brittany. She barely looked up. "How many?" "2," Keanu answered quietly. Then Brittany noticed Lily's wheelchair. Something changed in her expression instantly. Not cruelty exactly. Something colder. Annoyance. Like disability represented inconvenience. "We're pretty full." Keanu glanced around. Several empty booths remained visible. "We can wait." Brittany sighed dramatically and returned to texting. "Whatever." Lily lowered her eyes toward the floor. Keanu saw it happen instantly. That familiar shrinking. The silent belief that she was unwanted again. And suddenly his anger began rising. Not explosive anger. The dangerous quiet kind. The kind that waits patiently. The kind that remembers. 23 minutes passed. 5 other groups were seated before them. Each time Brittany ignored Lily completely. Each time Keanu's jaw tightened further. But finally Brittany grabbed menus carelessly. "Follow me." She led them toward the worst booth in the building. Directly beside the kitchen doors. Constant noise. Constant traffic. No space for the wheelchair. Keanu looked around slowly. And that was when he noticed her. A young waitress balancing 6 plates effortlessly while rushing between tables. Exhaustion showed in every movement. But kindness still lived in her eyes. Her name tag read. Grace. And within minutes, she was about to change everything. The dinner rush exploded across Kim's Kitchen like controlled chaos. Plates clattered. Coffee machines hissed. Customers laughed loudly over the sound of country music drifting through ceiling speakers. Servers rushed between crowded tables carrying trays heavy with burgers, fries, pancakes, and steaming bowls of soup. But from the moment Keanu Reeves sat down beside the kitchen entrance, his attention stayed fixed on one person. Grace. She moved faster than everyone else in the restaurant combined. While Brittany flirted with customers near the front windows and Derek disappeared repeatedly into the back hallway checking his phone, Grace worked non-stop. 12 tables. Maybe more. She carried drinks balanced expertly along both arms. Refilled coffee before customers even asked. Calmed screaming toddlers with patient smiles. Handled rude businessmen with impossible professionalism. And somehow, despite obvious exhaustion, she still treated every person like they mattered. Keanu noticed everything. The worn shoes held together with tape near the sole. The faded uniform washed so many times the color had nearly disappeared. The dark circles beneath carefully hidden makeup. The tiny moments when she pressed a hand against her lower back because standing for 16-hour shifts was destroying her body. But what struck him most was her face. Because underneath the exhaustion lived gentleness. The kind of gentleness pain sometimes creates instead of destroys. Finally Grace approached their booth carrying menus. "I'm so sorry about the wait," she said breathlessly. Unlike Brittany, she looked directly at Lily first. Not at the wheelchair. At Lily. And immediately something inside Keanu shifted. "It's okay," he replied quietly. Grace smiled softly. "My name's Grace. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Then she did something nobody else had done in 14 months. She crouched down beside Lily's wheelchair until they were eye level. Not towering above her. Not talking over her. Meeting her as an equal. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" Lily stared silently at her folded hands. Keanu braced himself for the usual awkward reaction. Most strangers became uncomfortable after silence. Some looked embarrassed. Others rushed to speak only to him instead. But Grace did none of those things. Instead she noticed the silver butterfly necklace resting against Lily's chest. Her expression softened immediately. "That necklace is beautiful." Lily's fingers instinctively moved toward it protectively. Grace smiled gently. "My mom loved butterflies too." Still silence. But Grace remained completely comfortable inside it. No pressure. No pity. No impatience. "You know something amazing about butterflies?" she asked softly. For the first time, Lily's eyes flickered upward slightly. Grace noticed instantly. "They start their lives crawling." Her voice carried warmth that somehow cut through the restaurant noise around them. "They can't fly. They can't soar. They spend all their time close to the ground." She paused. "Then one day they disappear inside a cocoon." Lily looked at her now. Actually looked at her. "And from the outside," Grace continued gently, "it seems like nothing's happening. Everything looks still. Quiet. Broken even." Another pause. "But inside?" Grace smiled softly. "Inside they're transforming. Growing. Changing into something stronger." Keanu held his breath. Because Lily was listening. Really listening. And eventually, Grace whispered, "They come out with wings." For a second the world around the booth disappeared. No kitchen noise. No customers. No corporate investigation. Just a broken little girl hearing something she desperately needed. Grace tilted her head slightly. "Pretty incredible, right?" After a long moment Lily gave the tiniest nod imaginable. Keanu felt his chest tighten painfully. It was more response than most therapists had managed in months. Grace stood slowly. What can I get you both to drink? Black coffee, Keanu answered automatically. Then he glanced at Lily. Sweetheart? Silence again. But different now. Less empty. Grace leaned closer conspiratorially. We have strawberry lemonade with real strawberries floating inside. She smiled. And bendy straws. That tiny detail mattered. She had noticed Lily's trembling hand immediately. Noticed and adapted without making her feel ashamed. Lily hesitated. Then almost invisibly nodded. Grace's smile brightened. Excellent choice. As she walked away, Keanu stared after her in disbelief. What just happened? How had this exhausted waitress reached Lily in 5 minutes when trained specialists failed for over a year? Across the restaurant a tall lean man emerged from the office near the kitchen. Dark slick-back hair. Cold sharp features. Arms crossed tightly. His name tag read Vincent Hartley. Manager. Keanu watched carefully as Vince scanned the restaurant with the expression of someone inspecting property instead of people. Then Grace passed near him carrying drinks. Her shoulders immediately tensed. Her pace quickened. She avoided eye contact completely. Fear. Not respect. Fear. Keanu recognized it instantly. He had seen that body language countless times in Hollywood around abusive directors and manipulative producers. Vince muttered something sharply at her. Grace apologized immediately despite clearly doing nothing wrong. The manager walked away. But the damage remained visible. Grace's hands shook slightly afterward. 20 minutes later she returned carrying their food. Mac and cheese for Lily. Burger and fries for Keanu. As she carefully set the plate down, Lily reached for her fork. Her right hand trembled violently. The fork slipped. Clattered against the table. Lily froze. Shame flooded her expression instantly. She tried again. Failed again. A third attempt sent macaroni spilling onto the table. And suddenly tears filled her eyes. Keanu moved instinctively. It's okay, sweetheart. But Grace reacted first. Without hesitation she pulled a chair beside Lily and sat down calmly. Not rushed. Not uncomfortable. Just present. You know something cool? Grace asked casually. Lily sniffled quietly. Our brains are kind of like road maps. That caught Lily's attention immediately. When accidents happen, Grace continued softly, sometimes the roads get damaged. She gently picked up the fallen fork. But brains are smart. Really smart. They build new roads. Keanu watched carefully now. But brains are smart. Really smart. They build new roads. Keanu watched carefully now. Every word Grace chose mattered. Sometimes signals just need to find a different path to travel. Grace adjusted Lily's grip slightly. Try holding it like this. Lily attempted carefully. The fork steadied slightly. That's it, Grace encouraged warmly. New pathway. New road. Slowly. Painfully carefully. Lily lifted one small bite successfully to her mouth. Her eyes widened. I did it, she whispered. Keanu froze completely. His heart nearly stopped. Words. Actual words. Grace smiled like it was the most normal thing in the world. You absolutely did. Lily stared at the fork in disbelief. My hand usually shakes. It still might sometimes, Grace said gently. That doesn't mean your brain stopped healing. Keanu could barely breathe now. Because hope, real hope, suddenly existed again. Then Lily asked something unexpected. How do you know all that brain stuff? A shadow flickered briefly across Grace's face. I went to medical school once. Keanu looked up sharply. You were a doctor? Not quite. Sadness touched her smile. I was studying to become one. What happened? Grace hesitated. Then quietly answered. My mom got sick. Simple words. Heavy ones. Lily looked at her carefully. My parents got sick too. The sentence hit Keanu like a punch to the chest. Grace's eyes softened instantly. Oh, sweetheart. They died. The words came flatly. Emotionless. Like Lily had repeated them silently in her head so many times they no longer sounded real. Grace did not interrupt. Did not offer fake comfort. She simply listened. And for the first time in 14 months. Lily started talking. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background. Plates still clattered. Customers still laughed. Country music still drifted softly from overhead speakers. But inside that small corner booth beside the kitchen doors, the world had narrowed down to 3 people. Keanu Reeves. Grace. And an 8-year-old girl who had finally started speaking again. Lily stared down at the bowl of mac and cheese in front of her while her trembling fingers tightened around the fork Grace had adjusted for her. For several seconds nobody spoke. Grace did not rush her. That was what made her different. Most adults panicked around silence. They tried filling it with advice. Questions. Forced positivity. But Grace understood something important. But now the words were spilling out on their own. Grace rested her arms lightly on the table. That sounds like a very cool daddy. He burned them a lot. A tiny smile almost touched Lily's lips. But he said burnt dinosaurs were more realistic because meteors exploded everywhere. Grace laughed softly. And to Keanu's complete shock. Lily almost laughed too. The sound barely escaped her throat. But it was there. A fragile broken little sound. And it felt more beautiful than anything Keanu had heard in years. My mommy made better pancakes, Lily continued quietly. She made Saturn once. Grace widened her eyes dramatically. Okay, that's impressive. She used blueberries for stars. Another pause. Then Lily's expression changed. The tiny spark faded. Sadness returned like a shadow swallowing sunlight. And now they're gone. The words landed heavily between them. Keanu instinctively reached toward her. But Grace gently touched his arm beneath the table. Not stopping him. Just asking silently for trust. So he stayed still. Grace looked directly into Lily's eyes. That kind of loss hurts in ways adults can barely explain. Lily's chin trembled. Everybody keeps saying I'm lucky. Grace remained quiet. They say I survived. Lily's breathing grew uneven now. But I don't feel lucky. Tears filled her eyes instantly. I feel alone. Keanu's heart shattered. Because those were the exact words he himself had once thought after losing Kim. Lily's voice cracked harder. I feel broken. The tears finally spilled down her cheeks. Real tears. Not silent numbness. Not frozen emptiness. Actual grief escaping after 14 unbearable months trapped inside her tiny body. Keanu stared in shock. He had waited so long for this moment. Therapists told him crying would eventually come. That trauma trapped emotions until the mind felt safe enough to release them. But he had started wondering if Lily would ever feel safe again. Now tears streamed freely down her face. I should have died too, she whispered. The sentence nearly destroyed. I should have died too, she whispered. The sentence nearly destroyed him. Keanu's hands clenched beneath the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Grace's eyes glistened immediately, but her voice stayed calm. "Oh Lily. If I died too," Lily sobbed, "then they wouldn't be alone." The words shattered something inside everyone listening. Even nearby customers had begun quietly watching now. Not intruding. Just sensing something deeply human unfolding nearby. Grace reached across the table slowly. "Listen to me carefully." Lily's shoulders shook with sobs. "You are not broken. But I can't walk right. That's injury. My hand shakes. That's healing. I still hear the crash in my dreams." Grace squeezed her tiny hands gently. "That's grief." Lily cried harder. And finally Grace said the words that changed everything. "Broken means something can never heal." She touched Lily's chest softly over her heart. "But you? You're hurting. There's a difference." Silence filled the booth again except for Lily's crying. Grace continued softly. "When someone we love dies, it leaves a hole inside us." Lily nodded shakily. "And for a while it feels like the hole will swallow everything." Another nod. "But eventually." Grace smiled through tears of her own. "People help us carry it." Lily looked at her carefully. "How?" "With kindness. With patience. With memories. With love that refuses to disappear." Keanu swallowed hard. Because suddenly he remembered Kim saying nearly the same thing years earlier. Grace gently brushed hair away from Lily's face. "Your parents loved you very, very much." "I know. And love like that doesn't vanish just because someone dies." Lily stared at her silently. "It stays here." Grace pressed a hand lightly over Lily's heart. "It becomes part of you." Fresh tears rolled down Lily's cheeks. "Sometimes when we miss people badly enough," Grace whispered, "we start thinking we lost everything." Lily nodded. "But we didn't." Grace smiled softly. "We carry them forward." The little girl broke completely then. She leaned across the table suddenly and wrapped both arms around Grace's neck. A hug. The first hug Lily had initiated with another person since the accident. Keanu physically covered his mouth with one trembling hand. Because he realized in that moment. The wall around Lily's heart was finally breaking. Grace held her gently while the child sobbed into her shoulder. And somehow, everything felt lighter. Then the moment shattered. "Grace." The harsh voice exploded across the restaurant like a whip crack. Every muscle in Grace's body immediately tightened. Keanu looked up sharply. Vincent Hartley stood near the kitchen entrance glaring furiously. Customers nearby fell silent. "Table 12 has been waiting for their check for 10 damn minutes." Grace carefully pulled back from Lily. "I was just helping. I don't pay you to babysit crippled kids." The restaurant froze. Absolute silence. Keanu felt something dark move inside him instantly. Cold. Dangerous. Lily flinched violently beside him. Vince continued angrily. "If she wants therapy, she can go to a hospital. Now do your damn job." Grace stood slowly. Shame flooded her exhausted face despite doing nothing wrong. "I'm sorry." Keanu rose halfway from his seat. But before he could speak, Lily grabbed his sleeve tightly. Her terrified eyes begged him silently not to explode. "Not yet." Grace squeezed Lily's shoulder gently. "I'll be right back, okay?" Lily nodded weakly. Then Grace hurried away toward another table while Vince continued glaring at her with cruel satisfaction. Keanu slowly sat back down. His jaw tightened so hard it physically hurt. Across the restaurant he watched Vince disappear into the office. Every instinct inside him screamed the same thing. This man was poison. And suddenly the investigation was no longer just business. Now it was personal. Very personal. Lily wiped her eyes carefully. Daddy? The word froze Keanu completely. For months Lily had barely spoken. And now she looked directly at him. Yes, sweetheart? Can we come back tomorrow? Emotion nearly overwhelmed him. Why? A tiny fragile smile touched her face. Because grace makes the scary thoughts quieter. Keanu looked across the restaurant toward the exhausted waitress carrying heavy trays while hiding her own pain behind tired smiles. Then he looked back at Lily. And quietly answered. Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. We'll come back. The next morning, Austin woke beneath heavy gray clouds. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the small hotel suite where Keanu Reeves sat alone at the dining table reviewing employee records spread across polished wood. But his mind was not on paperwork. It remained fixed on one sentence. I don't pay you to babysit crippled kids. The words replayed over and over inside his head like poison. Keanu had spent decades in Hollywood. He had met arrogant producers. Cruel directors. Power-hungry executives. But something about Vince Hartley felt different. More dangerous. Because small men with authority over vulnerable people often cause the deepest damage. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Lily stood near the doorway wearing pajamas decorated with tiny planets. Her butterfly notebook rested against her chest. For a moment Keanu simply stared. Because she looked lighter somehow. Still fragile. Still grieving. But alive again in a way he had not seen since before the accident. You're awake early, he said gently. Lily nodded. Bad dream? A little. She hesitated. Can we go see Grace again today? Hope flickered painfully inside him. Of course. Lily walked slowly toward the table. Her limp remained noticeable, but physical therapists said improvement was coming faster recently. Trauma released its grip slowly. One small victory at a time. She climbed carefully into the chair across from him. Then surprised him again. Are you mad? Keanu frowned slightly. About what? At the manager. Children noticed more than adults realized. Keanu leaned back quietly. Yes. Lily looked down. He made Grace sad. Yes. Another pause. Are you gonna fight him? Keanu stared out the rain-covered window for several seconds before answering. Yes. Her eyes widened slightly. Like in your movies? Despite everything, he smiled faintly. No. Then his expression hardened again. Real fights are quieter. 2 hours later they arrived back at Kim's Kitchen number 23. Keanu wore the same disguise. Faded jeans. Work boots. Old flannel shirt. Cap pulled low. Invisible. That invisibility mattered now more than ever. Because after last night, he needed to see how Vince behaved when he believed nobody important was watching. The lunch rush had already started when they entered. This time Brittany recognized them immediately. Her fake smile appeared instantly. Oh. You're back. But the warmth vanished the second she looked at Lily's wheelchair again. Grace's section is full. Keanu glanced around calmly. 3 empty booths sat untouched. We'll wait. Brittany rolled her eyes dramatically. Whatever. Lily noticed it too. He saw the hurt flash briefly across her face. Before Keanu could respond, another voice interrupted. I can take them. Grace appeared carrying coffee pots in both hands. Her exhausted face brightened slightly when she saw Lily. And Lily actually smiled back. A tiny smile. But real. Keanu almost stopped breathing again. "Hi," Grace said warmly. "Hi," Lily whispered. Brittany looked annoyed instantly. "You already have too many tables. I can handle one more." The blonde hostess scoffed. "Yeah, because apparently babysitting customers counts as serving now." Grace's expression tightened. But she stayed calm. "I said I can handle it." For a second Brittany looked ready to argue further. Then she noticed several customers watching nearby. Her fake smile returned immediately. "Fine." She disappeared toward the front counter. Grace exhaled quietly. Then guided Lily carefully toward a corner booth away from the kitchen noise. Keanu noticed the difference immediately. This booth was quieter. Roomier. Safer. Grace had remembered Lily's sensory triggers after meeting her only once. That level of attentiveness said everything about her character. "How's the brain highway?" Grace asked playfully while handing Lily crayons. Lily looked confused for half a second. Then remembered. "Oh." A tiny smile appeared again. "Better. That's what I like to hear." Keanu watched the interaction carefully. Grace never spoke to Lily like she was damaged. Never pitied her. She treated her exactly like a normal child healing from something difficult. And somehow that worked better than years of specialists. While Lily quietly colored planets onto the kids' menu, Keanu studied Grace more closely today. The signs of exhaustion looked even worse in daylight. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her hands shook slightly while pouring coffee. And twice he noticed her subtly rubbing her wrist when she thought nobody was looking. Overworked. Underslept. Burned out. Yet still kind. That combination infuriated him more than outright cruelty somehow. Because the world often punished its gentlest people the hardest. Across the restaurant Vince emerged from the office again. The manager immediately spotted Grace. Then frowned. Hard. He marched across the dining room toward her. "Why are you sitting?" Grace instantly stood. "I was just taking their order." "You're behind on table rotation again." "I'm covering Martha's section because she's helping in dishwashing." "That's not my problem." Customers nearby began listening openly now. Grace lowered her voice carefully. "I'm doing my best." Vince leaned closer aggressively. "Your best isn't good enough lately." Keanu's jaw tightened beneath the cap. Grace stayed silent. Vince glanced toward Lily dismissively. "You wasting time entertaining disabled customers isn't helping either." The restaurant became very still. Again. Keanu slowly looked up. Every protective instinct inside him ignited at once. But Grace spoke first. "Please don't say that." Something dangerous flashed across Vince's face immediately. "You telling me how to talk now?" "No, sir." "Then shut up and work." He walked away. But not before Keanu noticed several things simultaneously. Grace's hands trembling afterward. Lily shrinking into herself again. And nearby customers exchanging uncomfortable glances. Meaning this behavior was normal here. Routine. Accepted. That realization made something cold settle inside Keanu's chest. Because toxic workplaces survived only when fear became ordinary. Grace forced a smile moments later. "What can I get you two today?" Lily looked nervous again. But then quietly surprised everyone. "Mac and cheese." Grace grinned dramatically. "Excellent choice." "And pancakes." Keanu blinked. "Pancakes?" Lily had refused pancakes since Sarah died. Because pancakes belonged to Sunday mornings with her parents. Grace noticed his reaction instantly but politely pretended not to. What shape? Lily hesitated. Then whispered. Butterflies. Grace's eyes softened. You got it. As she walked away, Keanu stared silently at Lily. Butterflies? Lily shrugged shyly. Maybe they help people change. Emotion hit him so hard he physically looked away for a second. Because suddenly he realized something extraordinary. Grace wasn't just helping Lily talk again. She was helping her hope again. And no amount of money on earth could repay that kind of gift. Across the room, Vince barked angrily at Tommy near the kitchen entrance. The young busboy immediately flinched like someone expecting physical violence. Keanu watched closely now. Very closely. Because the truth was finally revealing itself piece by piece. And soon. Very soon. Someone was going to answer for it. Rain hammered against the restaurant windows as the lunch rush intensified inside Kim's Kitchen number 23. Customers filled nearly every booth. Coffee cups clinked. Orders shouted through the kitchen doors. Plates moved in hurried rhythm beneath fluorescent lights. To most people, the restaurant looked normal. Busy. Successful. Efficient. But now that Keanu Reeves knew where to look, the cracks were impossible to ignore. And once he saw them, he could not unsee them. Grace moved through the dining room like someone running a marathon with broken bones. Table 7 needed refills. Table 12 wanted separate checks. A toddler dropped syrup across the floor near the entrance. An elderly couple asked for extra napkins. Through all of it, Grace smiled. Not fake corporate smiles. Real ones. Tired but genuine. The kind that came from people who refused to become cruel even after life had been cruel to them first. Meanwhile, Derek leaned against the drink station scrolling through his phone. Brittany disappeared to the restroom for nearly 15 minutes. Again. Yet somehow Grace handled almost everything. Keanu watched silently while Lily colored butterflies beside him. Then he noticed something else. Every time customers left cash tips on Grace's tables, the money disappeared before she returned. Sometimes Derek collected the receipt. Sometimes Brittany grabbed the cash while helping. Twice Keanu watched bills vanish directly into Derek's apron pocket. Grace never reacted. Which meant one of two things. Either she genuinely did not notice. Or she had noticed long ago and learned fighting back only made things worse. Neither possibility sat well with him. A sharp crash suddenly echoed from the kitchen. Everyone turned instinctively. Tommy stood frozen beside the dish station surrounded by shattered plates. Water soaked his shoes. His breathing looked panicked. Vince stormed through the swinging doors instantly. What the he? I am sorry, sir. Sorry doesn't replace inventory. Tommy bent immediately to clean the broken pieces. I'll pay for them. You can barely pay your own bills. Customers exchanged uncomfortable looks. But nobody intervened. Nobody ever intervened. Because people feared conflict more than injustice. Vince crouched closer to Tommy. His voice lowered. Dangerously quiet. You think I forgot where you came from? Tommy's face lost all color. No, sir. That prison record follows you forever. I know. One phone call and you're gone from here too. Keanu felt rage pulse through his veins. Tommy could not have been older than 23. Just a kid. Trying desperately to rebuild his life. And Vince clearly enjoyed controlling that fear. Lily looked up from her coloring page. Why's he mean? Keanu answered carefully. Some people think hurting others makes them powerful. Does it? No. What makes people powerful then? He looked toward Grace helping an elderly woman walk safely to her booth. "Kindness," he said quietly. Lily considered that seriously. Then nodded once like it made perfect sense. A few minutes later Grace returned carrying butterfly-shaped pancakes. Pink strawberry slices formed tiny wings. Chocolate drizzle created delicate patterns. Lily stared at the plate with genuine surprise. "Oh." Grace smiled proudly. "What do you think?" "They're pretty. Pretty things taste better." Scientific fact. For the first time in 14 months. Lily laughed. A small laugh. Soft. Brief. But unmistakably real. The sound hit Keanu harder than any gunshot explosion or dramatic moment he had ever filmed. Because grief had stolen that sound from his life. And now somehow this exhausted waitress was bringing it back piece by piece. Grace pretended not to notice Keanu wiping moisture from his eyes. Instead she leaned toward Lily conspiratorially. "I made extra whipped cream because butterflies deserve clouds." Lily grinned slightly. Then actually began eating willingly. Not forced. Not pressured. Wanting to eat. Keanu could barely process it. Therapists had spent months trying to reconnect Lily emotionally to normal routines. Grace had done it accidentally in less than 2 days. Across the dining room Martha struggled carrying a heavy tray toward table 14. Her hands visibly shook from exhaustion. Before Keanu could stand to help, Grace rushed over instantly. "I got it." Martha looked embarrassed. "I'm okay, sweetheart." "No, you're not." Together they steadied the tray safely. Vince noticed immediately. And frowned. Again. He marched toward them. "Martha, why are ticket times falling behind?" She needed help carrying. "I didn't ask you, Grace." The restaurant quieted slightly again. Customers listened openly now. Martha lowered her head. "I'm sorry." Vince scoffed. "Maybe it's time you retired if you can't handle basic serving." Grace stepped forward carefully. "She works harder than anyone here." Wrong move. Vince's eyes darkened instantly. "You want to join her unemployment line?" Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Grace forced herself calm again. "No, sir." "Then mind your own business." He walked away muttering curses beneath his breath.
Martha looked humiliated. Grace squeezed her shoulder gently. "It's okay." But Keanu saw the truth clearly. Nothing was okay here. Nothing. A few tables away, Betty Harper entered the restaurant using her wooden cane. The elderly woman immediately spotted Keanu beneath the cap. Recognition flickered briefly across her sharp eyes. But wisely, she said nothing. Instead she settled into her usual booth. Grace brightened instantly when she saw her. "Betty. There's my favorite overworked medical genius." Grace laughed tiredly. "I'm surviving." "That bad?" "Worse." Betty's expression softened. "You sleeping at all?" "A little." "Eating?" Grace avoided answering. Betty sighed heavily. "Sweetheart. I'm fine." "You say that every week." Grace forced another smile and reached for Betty's coffee cup. But Betty quietly caught her wrist first. "You can't save everyone if you destroy yourself first." For one brief second, Grace's composure cracked. Real pain flashed across her face. Then vanished again beneath professionalism. "I know." "No, you don't." Betty glanced toward Vince. "That man's draining the life out of you." Grace lowered her voice immediately. "Please don't." "He's stealing from you again?" Silence answered loudly enough. Betty closed her eyes. Fury flickered across her elderly features. Then she noticed Keanu watching nearby. And somehow, she understood. Completely.
When Grace hurried away again, Betty slowly approached Keanu's booth. "You seeing enough yet?" she asked quietly. Keanu removed his cap slightly. "More than enough. That girl's drowning." "I know. She won't ask for help." "I know." Betty sat carefully across from him. "For 18 months I've watched that manager suck the souls out of good people." Her voice trembled with anger. "Grace used to sparkle when she first started here. Talked about becoming a pediatric brain doctor. Brought medical textbooks during breaks." Keanu listened silently. "Now look at her." Across the room Grace nearly stumbled from exhaustion while balancing 3 plates. She works doubles 6 days a week. Gives everything to her sick mother. And still barely survives because Vince steals half her tips. How long has this been happening? Long enough. Betty leaned closer. And that little busboy Tommy? Vince threatens him constantly because of his prison record. Kid's terrified every second he's here. Keanu's jaw tightened again. And corporate never noticed? Betty laughed bitterly. "Oh, they noticed." "What do you mean?" "That snake Vince got connections." Her eyes narrowed. Complaints disappear. Cold anger settled deeper inside Keanu now. Because betrayal inside his company felt personal. Kim's Kitchen existed because of his sister's final wish. Places built on dignity. Compassion. Humanity. And somehow monsters like Vince had poisoned that promise from the inside. Betty touched his arm gently. "You gonna help them?" Keanu looked toward Lily laughing quietly with Grace near the dessert counter. Then toward Martha rubbing aching wrists beside the coffee station. Then Tommy flinching every time Vince raised his voice. "Yes," he said softly. Betty studied him carefully. "You somebody important?" Keanu adjusted his cap lower again. "Not today. But inside." The decision was already made. And once Keanu Reeves made a promise to protect someone, he never walked away. By Thursday morning, the storm over Austin had passed. Golden sunlight spilled across the city streets, warm and bright, as if the world itself had decided to breathe again. But inside Kim's Kitchen number 23, nothing felt bright. Not for Grace. She stood alone near the coffee station staring silently at her phone. 3 missed calls. 2 voicemails. 1 overdue pharmacy notification flashing across the cracked screen. Her mother's medication was ready for pickup. Total balance due, $843. Grace closed her eyes. For a moment her shoulders sagged completely, exhaustion finally breaking through the careful composure she wore every day. Then footsteps approached. She quickly shoved the phone into her apron. Too late. Keanu Reeves had already seen the tears gathering in her eyes. "You okay?" The question was gentle. Simple. And somehow that made it worse. Because kindness often hurt more than cruelty when you were already falling apart. Grace forced a small smile. "Long morning." Keanu studied her quietly. People lied with words. But pain always told the truth through the eyes. "You don't have to pretend with me." That almost broke her immediately. She looked away fast. "I should get your coffee." Before he could answer, Lily spoke from the booth. "Grace?" Grace turned instantly. "Yes, sweetheart." Lily held up her butterfly notebook carefully. "I drew something." Grace walked over. On the page was a picture of 3 stick figures standing beneath giant butterfly wings. 1 small figure in the middle. 2 taller figures beside her. "You drew your parents?" Grace asked softly. Lily nodded. then pointed toward the third taller figure. And Daddy. Keanu swallowed hard. Because Lily had not drawn him into family pictures since the accident. Not once. Grace smiled warmly. I think your mom would love this. Lily looked down quietly. Do you really think people watch us from heaven? The question froze the air between them. Grace answered carefully. I think love leaves fingerprints on the world. Lily frowned slightly. What's that mean? Grace sat beside her. I think when someone loves you very much, part of them stays with you forever. In your memories. In the lessons they taught you. In the little things you do because they once showed you how. She tapped the drawing gently. Your mom's fingerprints are all over you, Lily. Lily's eyes filled with emotion. How? You're kind like her. A pause. You're brave like your dad. Another pause. And you still love people deeply even after getting hurt. Grace smiled softly. That's the biggest fingerprint of all. Keanu looked away toward the window for a second because suddenly breathing felt difficult again. How did she do this? How did she always know exactly what broken people needed to hear? Before the moment could continue, Vince's voice exploded across the restaurant. Grace. Every muscle in her body tensed instantly. Fear. Pure conditioned fear. She stood immediately. Yes, sir. Vince stormed toward her holding several receipts. What is this? I am not sure. Table 16 waited 12 minutes for drinks. I was helping Martha carry. I don't pay you to help people. The restaurant went quiet again. Customers stared openly now. Vince shoved the receipts against her chest. I pay you to work. Grace lowered her head. I'm sorry. No, what you are is distracted. His eyes narrowed. You think smiling at customers makes you special? No, sir. You think because disabled kids like you that gives you value around here? Keanu's chair moved slightly backward. Dangerously slow. Lily froze beside him. Vince continued cruelly. You're a waitress, Grace. Nothing more. Stop acting like you matter. Silence crashed across the restaurant. Real silence. The kind that arrives before violence. Keanu stood slowly. Very slowly. Grace saw it immediately. And panic flashed across her face. Because somehow she understood two things at once. First. Keanu was furious. Second. If he stepped in now, everything would explode before he had all the truth. So she shook her head almost invisibly. Please don't. Keanu forced himself still again. Barely. Vince sneered one last time before walking away. Grace remained standing motionless for several seconds. Humiliation burned across her face. Lily suddenly reached out and grabbed Grace's hand. The tiny gesture shattered something inside the exhausted young woman. Her eyes filled instantly. You matter to me, Lily whispered. Grace covered her mouth suddenly as tears escaped anyway. Then quickly hurried toward the kitchen before anyone else could see. Keanu watched her disappear through the swinging doors. And made a silent promise. This ends tomorrow. An hour later, during a slower moment between lunch and dinner rushes, Keanu quietly followed Grace outside. She sat alone behind the restaurant near the dumpsters, shoulders hunched, crying silently into trembling hands. The sight hit him harder than he expected. Not dramatic crying. Not loud. Just exhausted heartbreak from someone too tired to keep holding everything together. He approached carefully. Grace quickly wiped her face. I'm fine. No, you're not.